You found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey everybody, welcome to Dapper Reacts number 62. I'm here with Vishanti and Dr. Kip Davis, because today we are going to figure out who wrote Genesis.
Oh, wait a minute. I know the answer to this question.
Oh, you do?
Shall I tell you guys who wrote Genesis?
Yes.
You ready for it? Remember, I'm a biblical scholar.
Right.
Okay.
So I know these things. All right, you ready?
Okay.
It was Moses.
Oh, okay. Well,
Interesting.
I feel like that might not actually be what happened.
I actually don't think it was Moses, guys. Just chill out.
Okay.
Relax. Just everyone
I feel like
everyone take a pill.
Yeah.
Add some rye to your coffee. Relax.
Have any. All I have is coffee. I guess my second cup, because this is going to be more than a 1 cup stream. My second cup might have some orgeat in it, but that's not alcohol. That's just a almond and sugar syrup. It's
What
really
would be
good
the
coffee.
American version of rye?
I think it's still just rye, like rye whiskey.
Is this
Yeah, I think it's just right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, because you mean
But-
you can get you can even get Canadian rye whiskey. There's actually some brands of Canadian rye whiskey that I not too infrequently get here.
It's like it's really one of the things in terms of alcoholic exports. Canadian rye tends to be quite popular.
It is, yeah. I mean, I like it.
You've got things like Crown Royal and Gibson's and Canadian Club. You can get in most, well, maybe not most places of the world, but in a lot of places of the world.
I mean, you can certainly get them in Arizona. So
there you go.
it's sort of like bourbon. Like you can get bourbon in a lot of places. That is a thing from the USA. They do not make bourbon elsewhere. Anyway, we're not super here to talk about whiskey, although I do like whiskey. I do want to point out someone did ask about the fact that there is no more bitch-made timer, and that's true, yeah. Look, I think it was more than fair to point out that for a year, continuously, Sal refused to make good on the things that he said that he would do. And now that it's been a year, I don't feel the need to keep doing it, which is why I'm, at the end of the sentence, going to stop talking about the fact that the bitch-made timer isn't here, or that Sal wasn't there for the actual stream except for a few minutes, and that as far as I know, he still has not actually fixed that thing. And I'm just going to assume that that's just how it's going to stay, and I don't need my channel to be something that brings attention to that one piece of misbehavior over a year ago for the rest of time. So, plus, this way, I don't have to actually describe what the timer is to every single person who's new to the channel. So, we are here to take a look at a video from Creation Ministries International, which I believe this is their Canadian branch. And they are going to be
That's
telling
the other
us...
reason I'm here.
Yes, it was definitely not the biblical scholar bit. It was just so that we could have some maple leaf representation.
There we go.
Yeah, red and white, you know. Although
I believe the NHL playoffs start today.
Oh.
But,
Well, so does 420 if you're using the correct system for marking off which is the month and the day and the year. And the reason it's the correct system is specifically because of today. Because if today's 24, then what the heck is 24? That's nothing. 420.
That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, see?
Oh.
So take that the rest of the world.
Listen, before we watch the video, I'd like to point out that that lunar regolith phantasmal terrain has said that today I'm going to be the transitional fossil slideshow, and I gotta say, guys, I'm feeling a little personally affected by this comment, because I have a 51st birthday coming up in a matter of days. So should we just
to be fair,
like,
what they are talking
chill?
about is normally in that top spot, I do have a slideshow of transitional species that just runs on a loop.
It's a great slideshow, but listen, let's just keep our comments with Dr. Kip and Fossil in the same sentence to a minimum, or perhaps just not at all. Shall we? Just let's not do that.
Well, I'm going to hit play. We're going to hear about why it is that CMI wants us to believe that Moses wrote Genesis.
They're all very good reasons.
Yes.
I'm sure.
Yes, I'm sure.
Today we're asking, who wrote Genesis?
And I'm going to mute that music so that I don't get any kind of copyright problems. But, yeah.
In the expanse of the sky.
Yeah, so...
Wow.
I've heard a lot of people making arguments about the idea that the firmament really isn't a dome. Do you want to touch on that briefly? Because everything I've seen, other than people who really don't want the Bible to be saying that there's a dome over a flat earth, everything I've seen except from those people seems to indicate very strongly that that's exactly what the Bible's talking about there.
It is exactly what it's talking about. The word, which we translate as firmament, it's actually, and that's the Latin term that was invented specifically for this concept, for the idea that's being communicated. Get it? It's firm.
Yeah.
Firmament.
It's not the kind of thing you can just pass through easily.
No, you will get a concussion if you hit it with your head.
Right.
Maybe with any other part of your body too. I don't know. But so it's the Hebrew word itself is rakia, and it is derived from a verb raka, which is commonly used for literally pounding out sheets of metal, flattening them into like a flatter
Into a sheet, like
into a sheet.
Yeah,
like sheet metal. That's the picture.
Yeah,
here,
sheet metal.
right?
Actually, later on in I think it might be Exodus. No, I think it's Numbers when the Torah is describing how to build the tabernacle. It has you covering things in sheet metal. It's like make some wooden boards, but then cover them in sheets of gold. That's how you get sheets of gold back in the day. Is you hammer out a bit of gold into a sheet.
It's a lot of work. So but this is the picture, right? It's concordant. It's consistent with the with an ancient Near Eastern cosmology. So everybody within the ancient world conceptualized the sky in this fashion. The idea that you can understand it as an expanse comes from a passage, I believe, in Isaiah, where it talks about the skies, unfolding like a tent.
Except
right?
A tent is still roughly a dome shape over a flat surface.
Still solid, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like
roasting off. And I know Hugh Ross has popularized this idea, right? That the expansion of space is somehow communicated in the idea of.
It's funny how no one noticed that about space until it was scientists who figured out that the space, all the distant galaxies were receding. And then later on, some people were like, well, maybe that's what God really meant. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, if you know what I mean.
Clearly.
Roasting a frog milk sommelier Keller for $1.99 says, what else could firmament mean? I mean, basically you just make something
Whatever
up.
I want it to mean.
Yeah.
That's
Usually,
what apologists do.
People who want to keep some kind of biblical inerrancy and some kind of version of biblical literalism, which is impossible to do anyway, but the people who want to try will usually just say, it just means the sky. Okay. And their evidence for this is usually that Genesis says that the birds fly across the firmament, which, if I said something flew across my window, I don't mean it's inside the window. I mean, it went past the window. So I saw the window, and then I saw the thing. Like, they were separate.
It's literally like they're flying in front of it, right?
Right.
So,
yeah. Lunar Regolith Phantasmal Terrain, who's been a member for 11 months and is at the amniot level, says, Dr. Kip, that was not my intention, but it was a lovely bonus. 51st birthdays, smash cake every year with a cake and a Godzilla. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to hit play and keep going through this theme music, and then eventually I'll unmute. I don't I'm hoping I don't have much else to say. Waters flood the earth. Yeah, okay.
I'm sorry. That was my fault for interrupting.
No. Look, you're here so we can get insights on these kinds of things. This unleashed.
Spiritually,
I just like the idea that like you have to keep Genesis caged, like it's in like
caged up. It's a wild animal.
It's like you got to keep it in like the forbidden book section at the Hogwarts library in chains.
If you're familiar with the concept that's kind of in the Talmud that the text makes your hands unclean, then maybe you should keep it like locked away.
Okay, but Creation Ministries International is absolutely not familiar with any Talmudic discourse on the safety of the Torah.
Are they familiar with Harry Potter, though?
Probably because it's evil.
Well, so
yeah, because all I can picture now when I picture the Book of Genesis is the book of fantastic beasts and where to find them that wants to eat you.
Yeah.
So
the thing is, the kinds of Christians who are like, oh no, we can't let people read stories about wizards, whether it be Harry Potter or whatever, because that's witchcraft and that's banned in the Bible. They tend to be fans of things like Answers in Genesis and Creation Ministries International, but in an effort to keep a big tent among conservative evangelicals, those groups tend not to say much about things like fantasy literature, because they don't want to lose the money that is coming in from the Christians who are like, no, if you want to go read Percy Jackson or Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or whatever, just go have fun with it. I don't care. Because that's also a lot of the still young earth creationist type evangelical Protestants. So, like, they want to keep that big tent. But, the big tent within the groups of Protestants who are, crazy enough to still be young earth creationists. But also, I don't know why Kip's camera went away. And I'm not going to fix it so that you can see his avatar, because if I do that, then when his camera comes back, I just won't. I'll have to move it again. So until Kip's camera comes back, you get to see my Discord avatar, which is D&D character from a game that kind of fell apart because too many people had to quit, like all D&D campaigns.
And theologically deadly idea called the JEDP hypothesis.
Okay,
the JEDP, the documentary hypothesis?
Yeah,
is that what they're saying?
Yeah, that is one of those things. So, this is twofold. Well, I guess it's not twofold, but by the way, Kip, can you hear us at all either? Oh, okay, he's typing at us. All right, so creationists have this tendency to use terms that you can only find other creationists using, right? That's why they say things like polystrate fossils instead of upright fossils. That's why they say things like geological column instead of stratigraphic column. That's why they say things like mega sequence instead of cratonic sequence. These are all things that are pretty much unique to creationist groups, and that if you search for them, it will only come up with creationist sources. Whereas if you search for the real term, you're going to have to dig for the creationist sources, because there's actually a lot written about all these things, right? Like, geologists aren't ignoring the quote-unquote mega sequences. They just aren't calling them that. And so if you want to see their take on these big depositional areas, you have to look for cratonic sequences, and so on and so forth. But I think the reason they're doing this is so that when you go and Google JEDP theory, what you're going to find is just CMI stuff, and you're not actually going to find stuff from actual biblical scholars, like our guest, Kip Davis here.
His camera just crapped out, so he can hear us and see us, but we can't hear him if he's talking, so...
I thought I heard his mic get bumped a little bit. Kip, can you say something to confirm whether or not we can hear you?
I just turned on my... This is my computer microphone. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with my other... And it's weird. It's like my studio mic and my studio camera just died.
That's weird.
At the same time.
Did they come unplugged?
Hello?
Hello.
No, it's weird. Let's see if I don't have... It's so strange because on my settings, I don't have the option for either of them anymore. I have to...
Seems to me like something came unplugged.
Yeah, sounds like you should probably
weird,
plug them back in.
Right?
I would say I was just unplugging them and plugging them back in.
I've already unplugged and replugged in my microphone, but nothing is. Same
Not
with the camera
ideal,
too.
but Roasting a Frog Milk's Sommelier
picking
Keller
up.
says Big Tent Young Earth Creationism for $1.99. Thank you. And then Asta Reversed Laned Ryu who's been a member for 13 months and is at the Amniote level says CMI and AIG Zanes be like, no, you can read Percy Jackson. It's about the Greek gods. Like, Keck logic wouldn't make those Greek gods real. Yeah. So here we go. So do you disagree with me, Kip, that their strange rechristening of the documentary hypothesis as the JDEP hypothesis is so that when their followers search for it, they only find creationist stuff?
Oh, that sounds like a pretty solid theory.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Eric Hovind made his own creationist-only search engine so that you won't find the horrible, godless results from Google, because Google cares about your religion.
That's honest.
Here's a hint. Google only cares about their advertisers. That's it. That's why Google search results are getting worse and worse every year, and they're already at the point where they're kind of useless unless you're very special in what you're looking for. So.
Denying that Moses had anything to do with writing Genesis is based on bad scholarship. It's still
okay.
You're a bad scholar. Deal with it.
Widely being taught to future Christian leaders.
Exactly. Nearly all liberal Bible colleges and seminaries, and sadly,
liberals.
What liberal means?
Damn liberals
is seminaries that are willing to allow into their classrooms the conclusions reached by things like history, archaeology, textual criticism, and science. That's what that means.
Yeah.
Yep.
It basically just means people who care about evidence. Yeah. Cognitive Trifurcation, who's been a member for 2 months, says it might be a USB controller issue. Have Kip try unplugging and replugging in his mouse, and if he can't use it, restarting his computer is the fix. I was going to suggest that a restart might be necessary, but that might be something we do on a break.
During the break.
The break, yeah. So I think so I'm on my laptop, but it looks like there's something going on with it because I can't pull up either my camera or my microphone in like my studio mic and my studio camera in any application. So it's
probably a USB controller problem, but especially since you're I'm assuming that this microphone that you're using now is like built into the computer, not a USB device. Yeah, that's
exactly
probably what it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Which profess conservative,
that's right,
evangelical doctrine, teach the documentary hypothesis, also known as the
I was like, it's fatal to your faith.
So they do know what it's called.
Yeah, they do. I also like that it's fatal to your theology, apparently. And yet they're saying that these are seminaries that still teach all of the basic evangelical doctrines that they want taught. And yet they're teaching the documentary hypothesis anyway. I'm like, okay, so I guess it's not that fatal.
What's really insane about this is that, that word, right, liberal, gets used and redefined on the basis of basically whoever's attempting to weaponize it. It's the only time it gets used.
Yeah.
Is when Christians are attempting to basically denigrate whatever form of Christianity that they don't agree with. So, for instance, I used to teach at a Christian university that many would consider quite conservative. They now, did they lose? Yes, they went up. They went to the Supreme Court of Canada in a case in an effort to discriminate against homosexual people in their teaching program, and thankfully lost. Like they're that kind of conservative, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet they teach the documentary hypothesis. So
amazing.
By the measure that these chuckleheads are are putting into place here. Even that place, even the school that I used to teach at would qualify as a liberal. A liberal.
Them liberals.
Yeah,
for $10,
trying to ruin your faith.
For $10, Astra Reverse Lamed, which is, I'm being shown some IPA here, so I'm going to go with Lamed. Says also, if Google was into the evolutionist, communist, gay agenda as young Earth creationists say it is, then I'd think it wouldn't need to use my uni membership to find half decent sources. Yeah, you'd think it would just shove all those gay agenda sources right at you for free. Weird.
Yeah.
I guess the gay agenda involves a whole lot more charging for scholarly articles than I would have thought.
Yeah.
Darn those money-grubbing, non-straight people, I guess? I don't know.
JEDP hypothesis. So what is this documentary hypothesis?
Well,
what is it?
Liberal.
I mean, they've said documentary hypothesis.
It's a liberal theology, a liberal scholar theology. It's meant to steal your faith.
This video is going to be owning the libs. That's what's going on right now.
All right.
Critical view which denies that Moses wrote Genesis to Deuteronomy.
Right.
It teaches that various anonymous authors compiled these 5 books, plus other portions.
Can we pause it for a second?
We just
and
did.
Ask the question. Thank you. So, how do we know who wrote the first 5 books of the Torah?
Well, Kip, it says it right there, man. It says that Moses and Joshua did it.
Does it? Where does it say?
That's what my preacher said.
Yeah, at best, we get some things where, like, God apparently is dictating law codes to Moses, which you could make the argument that means that certain parts of the law code sections of the Pentateuch were written by Moses, if the text is to be believed on that point. But, like, it doesn't say anything about, like, the authorship of the narrative sections of the Torah.
Oh yeah, and I would go even a step further than that. And I'll say a couple of things here just to set this up. Virtually certainly the first 4 books of the Torah are entirely anonymous and written in the third person and make no claim whatsoever to Mosaic authorship. It can't even realistically be inferred. When you get to the book of Deuteronomy, it continues this feature, but with one important difference, in that the book of Deuteronomy is comprised of huge sections of reported speech from Moses.
Yeah.
But significantly, there is still a clear distinction between the narrator in Deuteronomy and I almost said Jesus. Moses's reported first-person speeches. Right. And then Deuteronomy concludes by saying that these things were written down and then stored in the Ark of the Covenant. So, like, that's the best that you get, are a series of reported speeches in the book of Deuteronomy. And then this idea ends up becoming stretched to cover the entire Torah, but it's not something that we see in effect until like the late Second Temple period.
Rosina Franck Sommelier Kellers for $9.99 says, liberal just means allowing something, idea, concept, or act that you ought to reject. See also Lib Dem LDP as the conservative Big Tent party in Japan. Yeah. At least in American politics, it always seems that liberal is whoever wants to do something a little bit different than what we were doing 10 years ago. And conservative seems to be anyone who doesn't like anything newer than about 40 years ago. And yeah, that leaves a big 30-year gap where no one knows what's going on.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that, like, if I decide to engage in any kind of political discourse with people, I really honestly require them to read the essay by Orwell. I think it's Politics in the English Language. Because he goes pretty in-depth about how people don't use words according to, like, their commonly accepted meanings in usage. They use them to trigger an emotion in you. They don't say liberty, and then you can go, okay, well, here's how people use liberty. Here's what it means. They use liberty to make Americans go, good, positive, freedom, eagles, yay. And he talks about how that
Osprey
is...
screeches that you think are eagle noises.
Yeah, osprey screeches are eagle noises. And when people are using words as a smokescreen for an emotion that they want you to feel, that is... Well, it's a tactic you sure could use, but I would say it's not very honest, because when you ask people who use words like that to go, well, what do you mean by liberty? They start floundering around and can't really tell you what it means, or they try to appeal to the dictionary and you're like, okay, but you didn't use it that way. And they just freak out, because then you have exposed that they're doing this as a tactic to try to like stir your emotions and rather than have an actual discourse.
We have a couple of super chats. Don Giovanni for $5 says, clearly the writers of Genesis include Tony Banks, Mike Rutherford, and Phil Collins. Furthermore, I find AIG are a bag of holding full of batons. Thank you very much. DM and his deplorable Ilkwing for $5 says, if Moses wrote Genesis, then how is it a first-hand account of creation with a Godzilla? Yeah, so that's actually something I wanted to talk about real quick.
It's in the third person, and if ostensibly God is narrating it, then he's just telling Moses what happened, but it's, again, this doesn't really hold up when you start looking at it, so.
Mr. Clifford, £2 says, when do we see Sock Puppet Dapper Dinosaur move? I don't currently have any plans for Sock Puppet Dapper Dinosaur. So one thing I want to point out is that, the type of Christian that CMI appeals to are both people who self-identify as biblical literalists, even though I think if you look at those words and what they mean, I don't think it's possible to be a biblical literalist. And also, they are the types of Christians who are big fans of sola scriptura. So the thing is, neither of those can get you to the Mosaic authorship of Genesis, right? If you're deriving all your doctrines only on the Bible, no Mosaic authorship of Genesis just isn't in there. And if you're a literalist, it also isn't in there. So it's very strange, and I think it belies the hypocrisy behind a lot of the stuff that people who say that they're sola scriptura and that they are inerrantists and that they're biblical literalists actually believe that isn't anywhere from the Bible, right? Because this isn't in the Bible. This is a theological tradition that, granted, goes back a long ways, right? It's going back into, like the first couple centuries BC or something, at least. But you're bringing that all the way forward, this tradition. And it's one of those traditions of men that Protestants like to complain about.
Yeah.
From of the old.
No, I was just going to say, we even a careful reader of the biblical text, with an eye to the chronology, the actual chronology of when these things were written and the dates of some of this stuff. When you get to the earlier material, it's really sketchy as to whether or not these people even knew of a prophet named Moses.
Yeah, well, there's some reason to think that this was not a Hebrew-wide figure, and it might have been someone who was had a restricted following in terms of a legendary character, and then as a result of various political maneuverings and unifications and migrations and whatnot, the idea of Moses as a legendary character spread into sort of a pan-Hebrew sort of veneration for the character.
Everyone get this book. I assure you, it is worth the dollars or the very, very legal amount of money that you pay for it if you don't go to places like Sci-Hub. Because it directly goes into, hey, maybe this was a amalgamation of traditions from the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And, maybe they were trying to make the two different priesthoods mishmash a little better. And maybe they were trying to centralize worship in Jerusalem rather than people having different cultic centers. Hey, maybe this is a response to, the Assyrian destruction of the northern kingdom. Maybe this is also a response to the return from Babylon. It's written for a lay audience. It is a fantastic book, and it does a much better job than these two numpties trying to be well, it literally says for Moses. Nah.
Also, Rustin, Frog Milk Sommelier Keller from 199 says, Kent Hovind says Adam wrote early Genesis. Yes, he does say that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he seems to think that whoever the main character, the main male character at least, in any given section of Genesis is the one who wrote that section. And then you can tell when it cuts off, when you get to these are the generations of, and then that's where that person signs off his authorship and the next person picks up.
Yeah.
Which is...
And somehow it just it flows seamlessly, literarily from one hand to another.
Everyone writes more or less exactly like their dad or granddad does, so don't worry about that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Testament from centuries of oral tradition up to 900 years after Moses lived. If, in this view, it's questionable did he even exist.
It's not that questionable.
Oh, isn't that funny?
The character of Moses...
Who would dare question the existence of Moses?
Yeah, the character of Moses as presented
These
in
guys
Exodus
are like
just didn't exist in any meaningful
200
way.
years behind the conversation.
Yeah.
It is hysterical to me.
Yeah.
At best, the historical core for a Moses character could be a guy who led some Hebrew-speaking, or at this point it would be indistinguishable from the common ancestor of Hebrew and Ugaritic, some kind of Western Semitic, or maybe Northwestern Semitic language out of a slave camp or something in an area under the hegemony of Egypt. That is like the best case scenario. It wouldn't have been millions of people. There's no reason to think they crossed either the Sea of Reeds or the Red Sea, whichever body of water you want to identify that with. They certainly didn't wander around in the Sinai Peninsula for 40 years. Like, how could you even do that? It's like a 2-week walk. The character of Moses as presented in Exodus has significantly less connection.
The obvious answer is that they wandered into the Twilight Zone. I mean, what other explanation is there?
Yeah, I
think it's obvious.
I suppose that could be it. But yeah,
you have entered the Twilight Zone.
There's
beyond this world, strange things unknown. Come on, Kip.
There's no archaeological evidence for an exodus of millions of Hebrews from Egypt. Notwithstanding the various interesting coral formations that people have found in the Red Sea that they've then pretended were chariot wheels, which is not what they are. They're coral. But yeah, there's...
Are you telling me that I don't own Pharaoh's chariot, like, right now?
Yes, I am telling you that.
I can't believe the audacity.
That's a question that they're asking as well. These hypothetical narrators are designated as follows. Now, J, standing for what the documentary hypothesis would term Yahwist, supposedly lived about 900 to 850 BC. He, she, they...
I mean,
no, not she.
Probably not she.
Did I detect pronouns?
Yes.
I think we're woke.
Yeah, CMI has gone woke, everybody. Astro Reversed Lamed Ryu says, I don't think my dad or granddad wrote AIG or a bag of dikes. Probably not. Probably not. Deeks? Dike? I don't know. Deeks? Or Digsks?
Digsks.
Whatever, allegedly gathered the myths and legends of Babylon, ancient Babylon, and other nations, and added them to the sort of campfire stories of the Hebrews, producing those biblical passages where the Hebrew letters YHWH, or Yahweh, or Jehovah, are used for the name of God. So where you see that, that's the J narrator person.
That's not 100% good for like a metric, but I mean, you're kind of heading in the right direction. Oh shit, it's my mom. I'll be right back.
While Vishanti is being right back, I just want to say that we are currently at 114 viewers, but only 39 likes, which unfortunately means I like less than half of you, half as well as you deserve. So hit that like button so I don't have to bilbo you again. Sorry, go ahead.
Listen, I hit the like button before the stream even started, which is odd for me. So, no one has any excuse if I can do it. So this is, I mean, there's so much. One of the things we need to make some distinction on is because they're conflating a lot here, right? They're conflating sort of the historical origins, the history of the scholarship of source theories of the Pentateuch, with and then the original formulations of it by scholars like Groff and Wellhausen with the ways in which the source theories tend to be promoted and communicated in modern scholarship in what's now understood to be the neo documentary hypothesis, or the new documentary hypothesis. Just quickly, by way of background, the first they're going to mention them, but the French physician Jean Astruc, in I think it was the 16th century, was very astutely started to see distinctions in the ways in which God was referred to throughout the Torah, either as Yahweh or Elohim, and started to sort of sketch in broad outlines what this looked like from a compositional perspective, and posited that this probably has something to do with two separate writers. Now, like, we've come a long way since then, and this has been significantly refined. It's not as simple as just looking at a text and seeing the mention of the name Yahweh, or seeing the mention of Elohim as a reference to God. No, a lot of this has to do with the significance of the name Yahweh, and when people started to invoke the name Yahweh. So, for example, you'll notice in Genesis chapter 4, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but I think it's verse 23, 24, somewhere around that area. The text specifically says that at this point in time, after the spread of Adam's descendants, at this point of time, people began to call on the name Yahweh, right? And this is ascribed to the Yahwist. This is an idea that belonged to the Yahwist. Now, you have to go all the way to Exodus chapter 3 and Exodus chapter 6, where another writer, which most scholars now identify as P, or the priestly writer, says that no, people didn't start to call on Yahweh that early. In fact, nobody even knew the name of this God, and rather referred to him as something entirely different. They called him El Shaddai. It wasn't until Yahweh revealed his name to Moses that they started to, that we even knew who Yahweh was. So what this means is that sometimes the narrator, being aware of who Yahweh is, will use the name Yahweh, even in places for, the priestly writer where the characters in the story don't necessarily know who Yahweh is. But then you distinguish those texts from the J, or the properly Yahwist text, on the basis of what the characters know. If the characters know the name Yahweh, then that's probably J. Does that make sense?
It does to me. I don't think it would to this guy, though.
Probably not.
So we got a couple things. Heather Vestigial Organism Coon for $5 says, I thought the alleged chariot wheels were actually from part of a cargo on a sunken ship. So my more nuanced understanding is that there have been more than one claimed item as a chariot wheel from Pharaoh's army found in the Dead Sea, and that they were a combination of things like wheels from much more modern times, roundish coral formations, and other things. The coral formation has become a sort of a minor meme among, critics of bad biblical archaeology, because there's also people who are investigating, biblical history and texts and doing archaeology that aren't just making up chariot wheels, who are actually doing archaeology. So yeah, it's certainly not as simple as just it was coral. So sorry if
see, when Vishanti mentioned it, I wondered right away whether or not she smuggled her Egyptian chariot wheel out in an old tire.
It's the only way.
Is she? Yeah, is she still talking to her mom? I can't see anything.
She's not currently on camera, so I'm going to assume yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
South Geek Insurrection also sent a membership milestone chat that was blank. Thank you very much. been a member for 12 months or at the annual level, and also for €5, said, "Hi, I'm at my own birthday party and celebrating 1 year of Dapper. Yes, Godzilla, gonna watch this tomorrow. Oh,
Nice.
Happy birthday." And also, yeah, obviously we love Godzilla here. And then Rosanna Frog Milk Sommelier Keller for $4.99 says, "Was the polytheism in Deuteronomy 32, 8-9 pre or post Yahweh?"
I'm assuming this means pre or post Yahwist in terms of the writing of the document that scholars have speculated about. This would be pre almost anything that was ever written in the Bible. Deuteronomy 32 Deuteronomy 32 is one of the oldest texts in the entire corpus.
Yeah.
Biblical corpus that scholars will date to like the 8th century, maybe even the 9th century, along with some other sections of the text you find in Genesis chapter 49 is also very old. Judges chapter 5 is very old. I personally think that is the oldest text surviving in the Bible. Also, Exodus chapter 15, the so-called Song of Moses, is also very, very old.
Okay. Well, I'm going to hit play on this.
Yep.
Now, E, standing for Elohist, supposedly lived about 750 to 700 BC in the northern kingdom, that's Israel, and wrote those passages where you see Elohim, and where that's used for the Word of God. So, and the next one is D.
Just pause it for a second. I already went through the whole thing with the name, so I don't feel like I have to repeat myself. But I'll just make a point here that as far as the neo-documentary hypothesis is concerned, and as far as scholars in general approach the sources of the Torah, the existence of E is far and away the most widely disputed. There's a lot of scholars who just do not think there was any such thing as E. I'm personally open to it because I think there's still some elements of theology within the text that look like they come from that look old and come from somewhere other than J and other than P. So the way this tends to get mapped out nowadays, scholars are fairly confident of three things. What they're confident in is the existence of the book of Deuteronomy and some Deuteronomic expansion within a few other places of the Torah. And they're really confident in the existence of P and priestly material in the Torah that is distinct from everything else that now tends to get identified as non-P. Now, non-P would include things that documentarians would classify as J and E, but there's a lot of people who think that since there was no E, it was all just J.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does to me.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. And I want to point out, so I think it's reasonably well known that when I went to high school, I went to a private Catholic school, despite not being Catholic. Which actually the majority of the students at that school weren't Catholic. There were more Buddhists than there were like anything else at that school. But and in my theology class, because every year, we had a theology class, when we went over the authorship of the Pentateuch, which is, I believe, what we referred to in that class, we were presented with the documentary hypothesis as it was largely being promulgated in the 90s. So there wasn't a whole lot of P, non-P, and we're still doing the Yahwist, the Elohist, and whatnot. But that was just the standard that we were given in my religious instruction class in my Catholic high school. For some reason, I guess they did not see that as fatal to their religion, because I don't think it is.
Those Catholics, bunch of dirty liberals.
I mean, to be fair, there are also a bunch of
Vicious back.
Yeah, there's also a bunch of super hyper traditionalist Catholics who would absolutely not accept any of this, but that is a minority position in the Catholic Church.
D supposedly wrote most of Deuteronomy, probably found that book in the temple in Jerusalem. You
mean that book that was found in the time of King Josiah?
I wouldn't say probably is the appropriate word there.
Yeah,
I would say allegedly would be a more appropriate word.
I mean, it's that book that very conveniently helps King Josiah consolidate power that was found by King Josiah.
Listen, everyone agrees that that what the book of the law was that was discovered in the temple is some form of Deuteronomy.
Yeah,
I assume these guys would agree with that. But they think this was something that was written by Moses and lost for hundreds of years, right?
Yeah, somehow, while just remaining in the temple the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But if you the reason people think this is because if you look at that story in 2 Kings chapter 22 to 23, and if you look at what what's said to Josiah by the prophet Huldah, and then when you look at Josiah's response to what the prophet Huldah told him, Huldah was a woman, by the way, and when you look at a couple of the other narrative features within 2 Kings chapter 23 specifically, what you see is it mapping on directly to elements that are distinct to the book of Deuteronomy. Perhaps the most obvious one is that we read in 2 Kings chapter 23 after Josiah has wiped out not just the worship of all other gods in the entire nation of Judah, but the worship of Yahweh in all other locations outside of the temple in Jerusalem. That's very important because that's very much a book of Deuteronomy thing. So after all that, the text tells us that the next thing that Josiah did was celebrated the first nationalized pilgrimage festival of the Passover. Wasn't celebrated in people's homes. They had to come to the temple in Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. Why? Because that's what the book of Deuteronomy says you are supposed to do on the Passover, and that's distinct from the book of Exodus. It's distinct from discussion of that in the book of Numbers. That's why the book that was found in the temple is always identified with the book of Deuteronomy.
I would argue that even from the sort of literalist standpoint that CMI likes to adopt, that you would still come to the conclusion that it is almost certainly Deuteronomy.
You would have to. I don't see how you could possibly come to any other conclusion.
Yeah. Pillowpunk, half dog, half canine, who for $2 says, "Happy 420 to those who celebrate." And yes, happy 420 to all of those of you who celebrate.
In 621 BC, you read about that in 2 Kings 22:8. P supposedly represents a priest or priests, a group of priests perhaps, who lived during the exile in Babylon and allegedly composed a code of holiness for the people. Then...
Man, imagine creating a holiness code at a time when your national character is in danger of going extinct, and being able to set yourselves aside as a distinct ethnicity might be important. What a crazy idea.
So... I just want to note that when I say that these two apologists are 200 years behind the conversation, it was really in Germany in 1805, W.M.L. de Wet investigated the origin of Deuteronomy and argued that Deuteronomy was the book that was handed to King Josiah, but he denied the book was by Moses. That's literally 200 years ago. These guys are that far behind.
Crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe a couple of other things to point out here. Importantly, you keyed in on this, Dapper. The holiness code, or which is the core of the book of Leviticus, is super important in a world that has just seen the end of a long-standing, hundreds of years long dynastic succession that stretches theoretically all the way back to King David. So, and this dynastic succession, which was promised to be in place forever, that's come to an end now. The temple has been destroyed. Of course, there's going to be a refocus and a reconsolidation of power under the priesthood.
Yeah.
Also, what's the evidence for looking for the author-editor of the original version of the story in Josiah's time? Why not the reign of Hezekiah or any one of the other kings? I think this... let me make sure that I don't. Frank Moore Cross is discussing 1 Kings 13, and there is a prophecy, apparently, in 1 Kings 13, and here was a man of God coming from Judah by the word of Adonai to Bet-El as Jeroboam was standing on the altar to burn incense. And he called out upon the altar by the word of Adonai and said, Altar, altar, thus says Adonai, here a son will be born to the house of David, Josiah, by name, and he will sacrifice on you, the priests of the high places who burn incense on you, will burn human bones on you. And he says that the reference to Josiah by name in a story that takes place 300 years before Josiah was born is remarkable, even in a book filled with prophecies and miracles. No other such case of explicit prediction of a person by name so far in advance occurs in the biblical narrative. So, when Josiah's like, hey, check out what we found in the temple, you guys, trust me.
The book that has his name in it?
The book that just happens to prophesy his direct name 300 years before he's born. Like,
Curious.
The first edition of the book that probably ended with the triumphal reforms of Josiah and his rule over the emerging kingdom of Judah and Jerusalem after a power vacuum had been created by the end of the Assyrian Empire.
Yeah.
Asta reversed.
And go ahead.
Lamed Ryu for 199 says 200-year-old BS argument, a new record. And Rosina Code of Holiness Keller for 499 says nothing interesting happened after the 18th century, anyways. All right.
So the issue thing that I keep bringing up this book is because it is easily and succinctly destroying these guys' arguments, which is basic historical scholarship. That's it. He's just telling you about the development of these ideas. Like, even the author, Richard Elliott Friedman, was like, yeah, I didn't think that Cross was right at first. I was like, nah, he's wrong. This is all, like, something else, da-da-da. And it wasn't until, like, decades later, after he had already defended against the position advocated for by Cross, that he goes, oh, wait, actually, no, oops, I effed up. And he starts listing, like, hey, this is here to establish Josiah's kingship and the authority of, like, cultic worship centralized in Jerusalem. And he lists out, like, a bunch of bullet points. The words, none arose like him, are only applied to two people in the Bible, Moses and Josiah. In Deuteronomy, Moses tells the people, love Adonai your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Only one person in the Hebrew Bible is described as fulfilling this, Josiah. The Deuteronomist says that he was a king who returned Adonai with all his heart, with all his soul, and all his might. That only occurs in those two places. Moses says in Deuteronomy that in difficult matters of law, when one's uncertain about what course to take, you must inquire of the priests or judges at the place where he chooses his name, and that is given to the priest, or via the priest Hilkiah at Jerusalem, the place that Adonai chose, and he says, go inquire of Adonai for me. So he keeps discussing that, and then my favorite point is point 5. The book of the Torah is mentioned only in Deuteronomy, in Joshua, and then never again in the Hebrew Bible, except in one story, Josiah.
Yeah.
Moses writes it, gives it to the priest, and says, hey, take this book of the Torah and place it at the side of the ark. The book then stays near the ark and ceases to be an issue in the story until 600 years later. The priest Hilkiah says, I have found the book of the Torah in the house of Adonai. And it's like, y'all.
Yep.
Also add an R, that's often added as well, that supposedly refers to various editors. R from the German redactor supposedly put it all together. That's the idea.
Right. Now, the idea of multiple authorship of these books was first proposed by Jean Ostrich in Paris in 1753.
Great.
However,
great pronunciation there, guys. Jean Ostrich.
Jean Ostrich.
Yeah.
Jean Stoup.
So, as far as I'm aware, I do believe that the great Rabbi Ibn Ezra, way back in the 11th century, might have been the first to propose that there were multiple authors in the Torah.
You know, non-Christian doesn't count.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Jeez.
Exponent was Julius Wellhausen, and he restated the documentary hypothesis in terms of the evolutionary view of history.
What does that even mean?
Evolutionary view of history. What?
You can't just put the word evolutionary in front of anything you don't like and then think that makes sense. What the hell is happening? Oh.
Which was prevalent in the philosophical circles at the time. So he claimed that those parts.
Yeah.
Nomura Nobuhide for $5 says, Dapper, why is AIG in this bag of dicks in the corner wearing a dunce cap when they should be wearing a bag?
Parts of the Old Testament that dealt with a sophisticated doctrine, one God, the Ten Commandments, the Tabernacle, these sophisticated things were not truth revealed by the living God.
So what they're suggesting, an evolutionary view of history, seems to be that things start out more primitive and less complex, and develop sophistication over time. But so this is. I mean, when it comes to history, this is all in the eye of the beholder, right?
Right.
There's nothing inherently simple about polytheism.
No, there's not.
Versus monotheism, which is something that they mention here, right? There's nothing inherently less sophisticated, I don't think, in the idea that the cosmos is an enclosed space versus, an open dualistic space, which tends to be metaphysical or philosophical developments that take place that contribute to the ways in which the biblical texts are interpreted in later periods of time. I will say one more thing, though. So there is a scholarly conference upcoming in May at Brown University that's being organized by my friend and colleague Dr. Dan McClellan, along with David Barnett, all about this issue of monotheism. And the theme of the conference is basically that there is no monotheism anywhere in the Bible, and that this is an idea that gets imported into the text and into the religious ideology at a later period of time.
Astro Reverse Lameda Ryu for $9.99 says, evolutionary view of history. The one thing you'd expect CMI to not disrespect to that degree. Starting to think calling them a pack of pickled peppers was too soft. So here's what we're going to do, guys. We are right at that 1 hour mark here. So I'm going to have a quick break.
I'm going to restart my computer.
Yeah, Kip will be able to restart his computer, hopefully rejoin the call. I'm going to get myself another cup of coffee. We will be back in just a little bit. In the meantime, please enjoy the musical stylings of one Bent Hovind. Okay, we are back. Kip is still having some technical difficulties. He's not currently with us. So yeah, that's a thing that we're currently having to deal with. But Vishanti will be letting me know when he is back. I'm muting him on my end so that you guys don't have to hear him trying to troubleshoot. But we are back. I'm going to hit play on this, and hopefully Kip will sort out his technical difficulties. And there he goes from the call. So, okay.
But were ideas that evolved from lower stages of thinking, including polytheism, animism, ancestral worship, etc.
Lower stages. Get over yourself.
I mean, okay. In their credit, they are using these as, like, this is not actually what we think. We don't actually think this. Now, the problem is that what they actually think is that we started with the higher monotheism and then devolved into these things. So it doesn't help a whole lot. But they are not agreeing with the idea that monotheism grew out of these things. They just think it's the literal, actual opposite. Which, to be fair, it is the case that, like, there isn't this just progression from animism to polytheism to monotheism. Like, that's just not a thing.
Hello.
Oh, hello.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear us?
Good.
Oh, good.
Yes, I can hear you guys.
All right.
Let's
is your
get
camera?
the video connected here.
Yeah, let's see how that works.
Can you see me now?
Nope, not yet.
Oh. Well,
I'll let you know.
The need to find or fabricate later authors. Now, one of the main arguments...
webcam.
How does that follow that as a result of the idea that monotheism evolves out of polytheism, that you now need to find multiple authors for the text? That just seems like a non sequitur. Do you see any logical throughput there, Vishanti? Okay.
Not really, no.
I was like, maybe I'm missing something. I don't know. You know, sometimes I just miss the point of things.
Was that writing had supposedly not been invented at the time of Moses. So this...
What?
What?
Who has ever said that writing wasn't invented at the time of Moses? I mean, you might be able to argue that, like, you know, the Phoenician alphabet hadn't really been solidified by that point, maybe. But even then, like, unless you have a really early date for Moses, I don't even think that's plausible. And also, I mean, Egyptian hieroglyphics predate absolutely any date that I've ever seen for Moses. Hey, Kip's back.
We can see Kip now. Yay!
I am back.
So
but now I've...
Yeah, Kip, have you ever heard any suggested chronology for the Exodus, assuming that it were, you know, a real event as described, that would put it before the invention of writing, which would basically be like pre-dynastic Egypt, near as I can tell?
No. So no, let me see. Sorry guys. I did a thing here and now I don't know how to undo the thing.
What is
I
the
accidentally
thing?
Well, I can't see the video now.
Click on any one of our photos and you'll see it goes from a one-person view to like a 4-screen view, and you should have the ability to check watch stream.
Is this? Show member list, add friends, pin message.
No, in our video chat.
In the video. Oh, okay.
Yeah, look above where the text boxes are, and you'll see like our photos or display.
Kip is earning that new birthday with his.
I don't see any. See member list. What if I click on? Nope, it's not
so
for me, guys. I'm sorry.
Okay, can you see my message?
Oh, hold on. Oh, I clicked on I can watch. Okay, let's just do that. I can watch the stream.
That should do it.
Oh, there we go. All good.
Proof that it happened.
Right.
So thus the documentary hypothesis undermines the authenticity of Genesis, creation, the fall, the flood accounts, as well as the whole patriarchal history of Israel. Right?
Does it though? I mean, like, look, you can just believe that the authors of Genesis were right, just like you can believe Moses was right. Because here's the thing. If Genesis were all composed by one guy, and that guy was named Moses, and he led a bunch of Hebrews out of slavery in Egypt, that fact on its own doesn't actually tell you anything about the veracity of Genesis as a historical account. Like, it doesn't help at all with that. It doesn't make it not historical. It doesn't make it more historical. It's just a wash, right? Just accept that it was multiple authors, and then just still think it's true anyway. Because you know what? You already think it was inspired by God to make sure that the authors didn't screw up. You think that about the whole Bible. Just think about the various people whose work was compiled into Genesis. Just transfer that belief onto them. It's fine. I don't get why this is a problem for them.
Like it is. It's wild to me how Christian guys like this. I bet these guys have no problem with things like the Psalms having multiple authors, or I mean the minor prophets are collected together as a single book in the minds of like the early Jewish collectors, right? Like these are very mundane ideas that have no bearing whatsoever on ideas about the authority and the authenticity of the text. Why not extrapolate that to stuff that's maybe not quite as obvious, but nearly as obvious,
right,
in the Torah?
I don't get why this is a problem. But then again, that happens a lot, right? Like young Earth creationists will be like, well, birds clearly can't be dinosaurs. And they'll give a whole bunch of reasons that would just work just as well for why whales can't be mammals. And it's like, well, you guys don't think that. And it's like, well, what's the difference? It doesn't matter to you. You can just believe that God created a subset of dinosaurs called birds on day 5 or whatever. Just believe that.
Right.
It's fine. You don't have to worry about it. Just like God made most of the mammals on day 6, you think, but he probably made the whales on day 5 because they're in the water. You can just keep that whole belief system and you just minorly tweak exactly what you think is meant by dinosaur and you continue on with your life. In fact, to be fair to young Earth creationists, there are some young Earth creationists who are doing that. They're just not normally employed by the big 3, which is Creation Ministries International, Answers in Genesis, and the Institute for Creation Research. Those are the big 3 creationist organizations that get together 95% of all the funding or something. It's ridiculous.
It presupposes that the whole Old Testament is one gigantic literary fraud and calls into question not only the intent.
I don't think there's well, you know what? I think it's funny that he mentioned fraud because guess what? Or that I just mentioned, I think it was it Cross? Or let me make sure I get the reference right.
While you're checking on that.
Oh, no. Devetta referred to this stuff being attributed to Moses as a pious fraud. And I think that's interesting because, you hear fraud and you think, oh, negative, bad, but it's a pious fraud because of the intent. It's like we're ascribing this to Moses because we have reverence for this narrative we're trying to create and we're trying to, establish this identity and draw boundaries around, who we are. And this, what's it, mytho-history kind of thing you got going on, they're going to say Moses wrote it because that's a way to nationalize and unify your history. And so, it's fraudulent in the sense that Moses didn't write it, but it's not, fraudulent in the sense that people are trying to grift off of it. It's just, it's a pious fraud.
Yeah,
and,
but it's not clear to me how
as I noted earlier.
They're anonymous.
It's not
books.
even... Yes! It's not even a fraud!
Right.
It's not a fraud!
Just read the fucking book, people!
I know!
If Genesis started with, this is an account of the history of the earth by Moses, right? Then maybe I could buy that this is but when you just have a text with no attributed author in the text, nothing in the text to indicate really who the author is, except that it refers to this one character in the third person, so it's probably not that guy, and by the way, that character is Moses. How can you say, well, we were wrong about the author before, and now we think it's this other guy? How does that make it a fraud? I just don't get it, right? And it's the same thing throughout most of the Bible, right? You could argue that many of the prophets are supposed to have been written by the prophet in particular, because in some cases, it talks about the prophet writing things down. Okay, sure, fine. Maybe in those cases you can say that the text is trying to attribute it to that particular prophet. Whatever, I don't care.
And you know what? Scholars, by and large, have no problem with that. Right?
Right. But Chronicles, Kings, Judges, the Torah, the Gospels, none of these are things that say this is who wrote this. So there's no way in which coming to a different idea about who wrote it than the traditional idea indicates that the book was a fraud in the first place. And also, not being a fraud and not being historically true. Like, these aren't all like the same idea, and they just seem to be conflating all of these things. Like, if the author isn't who we thought it was, then that means the Bible's wrong about who its author was, even though the Bible doesn't actually say who the author of this book was. Plus, it means that the narrative is wrong. Like, none of that is a follow-through. None of those things follow from each other. They're all separate things that you can address separately, and the answer to one does not necessarily affect the answer to the others. And yet, for some reason, these guys have made the Mosaic authorship of the Torah this central aspect of their theology, even though, were it not true, I don't see how it would affect any of the rest of their theology. I just don't get it.
Yes. So let's just be clear here that they are complaining about the rejection of one aspect of their theological model that they have added to the text that is not native to the text.
No, you have to impose it on
as somehow, like it's
yeah. I do not get why this video even exists, honestly.
Integrity of Moses, but also the trustworthiness or the divinity of Christ, of Jesus.
Sure, you know what? I don't even need to comment on the fact that doesn't follow at all.
Moses didn't write the Pentateuch, therefore Jesus was not God.
What?
I don't know how you connect those dots. I really don't.
Well, again, it's like if your theology is built on univocality, then any little chink in the armor, it just brings the whole house down.
But the thing is, they
can't let go of any of it.
But is that even a chink in the armor, though? Because they already think that the rest of the Bible has multiple authors. That doesn't mean that they think it isn't univocal anyway. So why not let...
Because particularly, they don't want there to be multiple authors because it needs to have a single unified narrative, and it clearly does not.
But they also don't think that Moses wrote, like, the books of Kings, but they still think it has a unified narrative, right?
Yes, true.
So, like, I get that might be the motive, but I don't think it actually makes sense, like, when you stop to think about, which clearly they haven't done. But, like, yeah, like, even if that's your motive, is you want to preserve a sense of univocality throughout the Torah, you guys already believe that the rest of the Bible has a univocal nature anyway, despite the fact that you acknowledge different authors. Like, the very point of calling the Gospels what you call them is because you don't think they have the same author. Now, I don't think anyone else thinks they have the same author, too. That would be weird. But, like, you still think that throughout that whole thing that there's a single consistent voice, despite multiple authors. That's kind of part of the whole point of thinking the text is inspired. Just lean on that belief. I'm just going to hit play because if I'll be able to keep ranting about this.
No wonder the critics have embraced it so warmly.
Yeah.
What's surprising is how many so-called...
I was just going to say the critics have embraced these ideas because they make sense.
Right.
Because when you look at the text and you are attempting to understand what they are and where they came from, this makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Also, Aster Reverse Lamed, you for $19.99 says, you should have a more flexible theology than these Egypts. Thank you very much. And the thing is, I want to be fair. Most Christians do. Most of the Christians I know don't have a problem with a version of the documentary hypothesis. It might not be the old-fashioned version they're going with, right? Or they might just not know about advances in the scholarship in that field, but whatever. Most of them are not like, no, if Moses didn't write the Torah, then my entire religion is just done.
It's in vain.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot of Christians who would make that claim.
Listen, just to give you an idea of this sort of mindset, when I was a teenager, I think it was like 16 years old, I went to the church that I
This was
grew
the
up in.
mid-20th century, everyone.
Yes, thank you. So the church that I attended had the denomination had a triannual North American wide conference, and my parents dragged us kids to a couple of them. When I was in high school, it was actually kind of fun because we all got to stay on like the university campus and the dorms together, and we had our own special like high school Baptist sessions, and they invited this speaker. His name was Dewey Bertolini, and he used to teach at Master's Seminary in California. And he gave the very first lecture that he gave to us. He made this statement, right? He making this strong case for the reliability and the historical veracity of the scriptures. He was attempting to make this point that, archaeology supports the Bible, and made the statement. It was very powerful when I was 16 years old, right? Made this statement that prior to the 1920s, when they discovered the Anatolian Empire, basically, the only historical evidence that there was for the existence of the Hittites was in the Bible. And he made this statement that prior to 1920, it was, you could raise legitimate questions about the veracity of the Bible based on the fact that we had no evidence of the Hittite Empire. But boom, they discovered Anatolia, and now we do. Therefore, the Bible is all real. And it rests on this hinge, right?
Hittites real, therefore the rest of it is true.
Yes. And if not for that, he actually made the statement, if not for that, you could take the whole book and throw it away.
What is that?
Like, what kind of a dangerous sort of theology is that?
I mean, also, I feel like there's a whole lot of other things that are in the Bible for which there's not really evidence for or against either. So does that mean do we have to wait until everything is proved for Christians to feel comfortable accepting? I don't know.
It's wild.
Demon is a portable Ilkwing for $5 says, if Moses didn't write Genesis, Christ might not be God, and young Earth creationist God is the weakest version of God. Actually, I would tend to agree that the young Earth creationist version of God is a weirdly pathetic version of God.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that he's allegedly supposed to be omnipotent, it's like, okay, well, you don't seem to act like it, but okay.
I mean, we could get iron chariots and attack and dethrone God. Let's go!
Boom. That's all you need. You think tanks count? Do tanks count as iron chariots?
Sure.
Well, I don't know. They don't have wheels, though. Well, or I guess they kind of
have wheels. They have wheels that help the treads move.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay.
Conservative theologians have also embraced it.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, was Moses J, E, D, P, or R?
Yeah, right.
No.
Answer. What is this picture?
Rather,
what the hell is that?
This looks like
I don't know.
A random Middle East type man that they've stuck in here.
Is this supposed to be Moses or not Moses, or a random documentary
I don't
author?
know.
What are we doing here?
Is this a conservative theologian? Maybe. I don't know.
I mean, he looks like he's just some guy from Central Asia. Like, that's what it looks like to me. He's just rando from Central Asia. Which, I don't know if you guys know, but Central Asia is really not the location where you would expect to find the biblical authors. You'd want more like West Asia. About as west as Asia goes.
Moses himself was both writer and editor of the Pentateuch. And these 5 books were composed by him in about 1400 BC. No.
So
I guess that was supposed to be Moses.
He wrote the Pentateuch
and edited,
and then he edited it. Like, what does that even mean?
Well, so he writes down his first draft, and then he's like, no, I got the grammar wrong here. I should have put a paragraph break there. And so he does like another draft.
I mean, I do that, but that's just called writing.
Well, see, that's my question, is why would Moses need to edit anything if God's dictating it to him? You should have it right the first time.
That's right.
Sometimes Moses misheard.
Oh, now that's another spanner in the works, my friend.
Yeah. And also, apparently, maybe his alleged speech impediment sometimes also bled through into the actual writing. So,
almost forgot a noddle.
Exactly.
No, is he? So maybe I'll say this. I'll say this now. I think this is where the writing didn't exist argument comes in. These guys appear to be proponents of the early Exodus theory, which is that it took place in the 15th century, right? 15th century BCE, back in the Bronze Age. So I suspect this is a crucial point for them, because we know that the Torah was written in Hebrew, right? It was. That's the language it was composed in. And we also know we have no evidence of any Hebrew writing at all this early. The earliest you get is a proto-Semitic script coming into emerging at some point in the 13th, 12th, 11th century thereabout. Stuff's going on where Egyptian hieroglyphs are being turned into letters and attached to these Northwest Semitic language groups, right? Mm-hmm. So, but that certainly doesn't happen as early as 1400 BCE.
Okay, so yeah,
maybe this is a big deal for them, right? Yeah. So, but then even there, if they're going, well, of course, there's writing that early. I mean, they're even getting that wrong, right? Because no.
I mean, writing as a thing existed. Cuneiform existed. Hieroglyphics existed.
Yes, but the critical point here is that Hebrew as a written language didn't exist that early.
I would argue that as a separate spoken language, I don't think it existed at this point.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe not, eh?
Yeah.
So
especially if we're going to distinguish like Ugaritic as a separate language from Hebrew. If that's the point, then I don't think that there's two separate dialects at this point that you could point to one and say this is the Ugaritic version and this one is the Hebrew version.
Yeah. And as near as so this is not really my area of expertise, as my good friend Dr. Joshua Bone likes to say. But as far as I'm aware, what's happening in the linguistic exploration of these languages that we label as Canaanite is that the differences between them, between what constitutes Hebrew or what constitutes Ugaritic or Phoenician or like Moabite, has a lot more to do with the presence of certain words versus others. Like the grammar's identical. Yeah. And the vast majority of the cognates are all there in all the languages. Right?
Yeah.
You're basically what you're seeing is more frequent usage of certain words as opposed to others. That there's sort of cordoning and grouping off, and in reality, I think what we're dealing with is these Canaanite languages and the differences between them that start to be distinguished as like Ugaritic and Hebrew and Moabite are, I mean, barely even dialectical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By unknowns at the time of the exile. Now, this doesn't mean that Moses did not use other written sources available to him, and we're going to talk about that in a bit.
That's what they mean by editor. That's what they mean.
Yes, okay.
Or that he wrote the last verses of Deuteronomy.
Sorry.
Yeah, they're also pointing out that he probably didn't write the bit about Moses dying, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. Yeah.
But he didn't edit that part either.
Well, yeah, they probably would say that someone else, probably the person who wrote that bit.
Yes,
yeah.
Rabbinic tradition says Joshua added it.
Yeah, it would have been a little bit weird for like Jesus or for like God to be like dictating to Moses and then Moses went up to the mountain and he died there, and then Moses is looking up like, hey, hold up, what now? Which mountain am I going up?
Yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly, there is rabbinic discourse over this where there's an idea that, like, yeah, some people are like, well, it was left unfinished so that Joshua could write about Moses' death, and then he narratively and, like, in a leadership way takes over. But then there's other people who are saying, well, actually Moses did write it, and it was part of his punishment for striking the rock that he would have to, like, not only see everybody else go into the land while he didn't, but have to write about his fate as like a way to kind of tie off that whole
get wrecked, Moses.
Right?
How dare you strike that
get
rock?
Wrecked, most humble dude ever. Like,
but I think that's I don't. You probably know this better than I do, Vishanti. But I believe that's Talmud Bavli stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I don't remember if it's in the Yerushalmi, but that's because like I haven't gotten to that particular.
It's not Mishnah though. Importantly,
yeah, I don't know.
So we're talking about traditions that we date conservatively to like
I could look it up, but I don't know if it's
like the 5th century CE. CE, like this is almost medieval stuff here.
Yeah. That's the one of the
that's a
reasons,
reliable source, but
I prefer the Yerushalmi for like a lot of reasons, but also because it's so rough around the edges, you get a little bit earlier context for some of the writings and like ideas that we're formulating. Like it got abandoned in terms of like editing and redaction hell before the Bavli did. So the Bavli tends to be the much later trend. But Yerushalmi, it's really hard to get through because it didn't have the extra couple hundred years of editing. Which, of course, I'd play this on hard mode. Of course I would.
Or that record his death, of course. Rabbinic Jewish tradition has always been that they were added under divine inspiration by Joshua.
Always.
There's no
always
so
from the very beginning.
Let's just qualify that word always is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Always.
I would say the word always never applies to Judaism at any point in time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like by always we mean like maybe for the majority of the time that rabbinic Judaism has existed, and a bare majority. Okay, maybe we could probably say that, but that's not the same thing as always.
Yeah, that's
and again we're talking about like we know there's so little about like we really know very little about what was going on for like a couple hundred years in early Judaism, right? Like we just have no idea.
Yeah, and it's a lot less distinct when you see shifts between Second Temple Judaism and what we now think of as Rabbinic Judaism. There wasn't a day where everyone went, okay, and it's the 1st of Tishrei, we are Rabbinic Jews now, it's Judaism 2.0, let's go. That's not what happened. This is a long process, and the divergence of like mainstream Christianity from Judaism, that was a whole process. It didn't happen overnight, and they're both reacting to each other's changing theology.
And, hey, so for those first couple centuries, there's a lot of permeability between those groups. It's not clear that you can just divide people into Christian versus Jewish in a lot of cases. Now, there were obviously non-Jewish Christians who probably would not have claimed any real link to Judaism. But like there were a lot of people who were Jewish and who were doing things like going to churches at various times. And there were people who maybe didn't super think of themselves as Jewish, but were still kind of going to synagogues here and there. And in fact, you can find a lot of writing in the first few centuries CE about various people being like, hey, Christians maybe don't go to the synagogue, and vice versa. Like, we're not the same thing. Because it wasn't clear to most people that those were really separate things for those few centuries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
external evidence at all in support of a JEDP or R. I mean, what were their names? What else did these literary...
Second, guys. So, when they say there's no... there's several things going on here, right? Like, external evidence to support the documentary hypothesis. This is true on a manuscript level because we have no manuscripts like prior to 300 BCE. So any manuscripts that we have are long post date the original sources themselves. So like that's what's going on there. Now, in terms of depending on how we determine what external evidence is another important question here.
I would argue that the evidence that Josiah was heavily involved in the authorship of Deuteronomy in terms, or at least that period of time, and that Deuteronomy is closely connected to him. I would argue that that's external because it's not the Torah. It's another text that comes from a later time. And it seems to strongly indicate that at least Deuteronomy is not an original part of this corpus of texts, and that it is something that came in later. So at the very least, I would say we have strong external evidence for the existence of D. Plus, it's an argument about the internal nature of the text. It's primarily based on evidence internal to the text in the first place. That's kind of how an internal argument about this nature of the text works.
I'm trying to find the bit where Friedman tells you who he thinks one of these authors are. So talk amongst yourselves, and I'll blur.
While you're doing that, if I can take the opportunity to just make mention of the book that I wrote, back in 2014, the K4 Apocryphon of Jeremiah and the Jeremianic traditions, the Qumran Jeremianic traditions. Don't go and buy this book, people, because you can't afford it. But you can find places to download it for free. And if you can do that, it might be worthwhile. But I mentioned the book because I almost never get a chance to mention it. But I think it's relevant in this situation, because one of the things that I did in my PhD dissertation was to analyze a selection of texts that we know from the Dead Sea Scrolls and apply a method and a model that we have for the documentary hypothesis to these manuscripts. And was able to demonstrate the same ways in which individual compositions were taking older source material and stitching it and developing it into something new, very similar to the ways in which scholars have speculated about the ways in which the redactor or the priestly writer or whoever you want was putting together these original sources.
So I found it.
Okay, what do we got?
So the Friedman's mentioning the authors of the Talmud, discussing like who wrote the Torah, who wrote the like books of Joshua, Kings, and all that, the historical books, and like the rabbinic consensus is Moses wrote the Torah, Joshua wrote Joshua, which like you're not surprised, but in Bava Batra, which is one of the tractates of the Talmud, they say that the author of Kings is Jeremiah. That's their tradition concerning that. But in terms of who the Deuteronomist is, Friedman thinks that it's Baruch, the son of Neriah, the scribe. And he shows some archaeological evidence of like a wax or a signature seal. And he's like, hey, even if he wasn't the writer, he was at least a collaborator in terms of editing and like collecting the books. He says, whether Baruch, the son of Neriah, was the recorder, author, or collaborator, it's important to take note of the fabulous archaeological find concerning him. And then he shows a clay seal. And
that's who wrote the Bible, right?
That's it.
So
that's who did it.
Now,
yeah.
So yeah. I feel like I have to say something about the Baruch seal.
Yeah.
Because since Friedman published his book, there's been quite a bit of criticism about this particular object, and there's a lot of scholars who will say this is a modern forgery. But and I think so. But the point is, I think it's a relevant point in connecting Baruch to the Deuteronomistic history in particular, because this is something that Jeremiah himself fits within the Deuteronomistic school. And part of the reason for this also could be that there's whole chapters in the book of Jeremiah that are just straight ripped out of the Deuteronomistic history, right?
Yep.
I mean, we have the same thing. We have the same thing in the book of Isaiah. The story of Hezekiah in chapters 36, 37, 38, 39. I know, I always get them mixed up. But those chapters there are pulled straight out of 2 Kings. I think it's like chapters 15 through 18 or 16.
My mind was blown reading this, going, Jeremiah wrote Kings and part of these historical books, and then he explains, well, yeah, because he came from a priestly tradition. He then compares like word for almost word Jeremiah's writings and the writings of like Kings, and I'm like, oh my god, I never would have put this together. And obviously Baruch could have helped him, he might have scribed for him, whatever, it's fine. But just like based on the language alone, I was like, you got a pretty strong case.
No,
So
one of the other things. Sorry, I was going to say. Well,
go ahead.
One of the other things that we see in Jeremiah is this strong predilection towards all things Deuteronomic or Deuteronomistic. Jeremiah is also he is, as far as I know, the only prophet Hebrew prophet to mention Samuel. I think is the only Hebrew prophet to talk about the tabernacle. And one, maybe the only, but certainly not one of a very small group to mention Moses as well. So, like, there's many points of connection of Jeremiah to at least DTR, at least the Deuteronomistic history of some in some form in the book of Deuteronomy.
And even if some of the points that Friedman makes aren't consensus anymore, this is a great starting point for people just getting into the topic or want to be casual read about it. Because, like, even now there's something that scholars are pushing towards, like the neo-documentary hypothesis, because, again, these are interpretive models based on, like, not a lot of manuscript evidence. We have to analyze the language, analyze the vocabulary, so you can't ever come down firmly on something, but you can make stronger or weaker cases for things. And even the documentary hypothesis has undergone, like, significant tweaks over the last 35 to 50 years. And yeah.
And also, I want to point out, he's making a big deal out of not knowing the names of these authors. That's
we don't know the names of the gospel authors. What are you doing?
Completely immaterial
but we do, Vish.
Well,
sorry,
it's
Matthew, Mark,
completely irrelevant as to whether or not you know the names of your purported authors in order to identify that a text has more than one author, right?
Yeah.
You check things like writing style, word choice, things like that, right? And when those differ significantly and in, like, big chunks where you're like, okay, this text seems to have big chunks with this style and other chunks with this other style, chances are that's not the same guy. You don't need to know who they are in order to make the claim that it's two guys, right? That's not how it works. It's sort of like if you go to the side of a building, right, and it's got all sorts of graffiti on it, you can probably tell that more than one person put graffiti there if that happened, because there will be different styles. There will be different types of lettering. The artistic style behind, like, any of the paintings will be different. And that's even just ignoring that there might be separate tags. Like, just pretend there's no tags at all. It's just different people putting up some art on a wall. If it's not the same style, or even just things like, it's using different kinds of spray paint or something, that could indicate more than one person, and you don't need to know who any of those people are to come to that conclusion. I'm going to hit play.
Just before you do, like, I'm just wondering how far they're willing to go with this.
We'll only know if I hit play.
As some form. Okay. About the names of the authors.
The only way to know how far they'll go is if I hit play.
Okay. All right.
Savants write history, Hebrew, secular, they know nothing of them. Right. They exist only in the fertile imaginations of the inventors of the documentary hypothesis.
Now,
projection!
Most authors from the ancient world are completely unknown, because most texts from the ancient world are completely gone. And most ancient texts that have survived do not have authors that we can name. Like, you want to take a look at the Epic of Gilgamesh. Who wrote that? I don't have a name for you.
Gilgamesh, obviously.
Gilgamesh, yes.
You look at, like, the writings of Homer. Homer probably didn't exist. Who did write those things? Don't know. Might not have even been one guy. I don't know. Like, you keep looking, right?
And the crazy thing here is that these guys probably have no problem with not knowing who wrote Gilgamesh or who wrote Homer. Right, they're probably perfectly willing to accept the the anonymity of those texts, but the Bible's special. Right. And even within the biblical text, like, I wondered how far they're willing to stretch this. Like, are they willing to stake everything on something like Chronicles? Who wrote the books of or the Book of Chronicles?
I mean, Chronicles certainly isn't going to tell you.
Is it really important for them to identify the author and to maintain that this is certainly who wrote it?
I very much doubt
even if they did. Even if you have the name of the author, they're going to say, well, God just divinely inspired them on what to write. Yeah. It doesn't matter who the author was to them.
Not at all.
Yeah, this is a very bizarre
video. I want to quote Anonymous Pie in the chat says, there's two writing styles, Moses and drunk Moses, obviously.
On the other hand, the evidence that Moses wrote the Pentateuch, often referred to in the Bible as the Law or the Torah in the Hebrew, is overwhelming.
There are
here
we go.
That strongly support Mosaic authorship. Number one, contrary to the views of Wellhausen and others, archaeological research has established that writing was indeed well known in Moses' day.
Yeah, that was one of the main.
Oh my God! What is happening?
Hold on, we have to back up because now I don't know.
I'm sorry. I was. Yeah.
I've never heard Kip crack up like that.
I was suffering a mental breakdown.
Okay, here we go. We're going to try to listen to what they actually say.
Okay. 5 things that strongly support Mosaic authorship. Number one, contrary to the views of Wellhausen and others, archaeological research has established that writing was indeed well known in Moses' day.
Yeah.
What kind of writing?
Okay, look, even if we accept that, like, I'm just going to go ahead and say, even if we say that the modern block script Hebrew was already an established and developed tradition at the time of Moses, that does not in any way tell us that Moses was the one who was using it to write the Torah. All that does is say, well, this guy had the tools available to him, assuming he existed, to write a book. Okay, I guess that would follow, but what that doesn't mean is this particular guy is the one who wrote the book. Right? I don't know if you guys know, right? Mm-hmm. But right now, there is a well-established system for writing English. That does not allow me to pick up any random text and assign it to either Kip Davis or Vishanti as the author. That's not how that works.
But I won't object.
Well, okay, fair enough. But, I still can't... That isn't evidence. That someone exists at a time with writing doesn't indicate that they are the one who wrote a particular book. It just means that you can't rule it out. Plus... Again, if you want to go with this early date for the Exodus, there is no evidence of a well-developed Hebrew writing system at the time, or even just Hebrew as a thing that's in any way distinct.
No.
I mean, I, for one, am very pleased to announce that I wrote the Dark Tower series, because, hey, what a great magnum opus that is. I've been alive for, pretty much that whole thing. You beat me to it.
I was going to make that claim, and now I can't.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Maybe you wrote the Song of Ice and Fire series, Kip.
Maybe I wrote that one.
Maybe. For $5, Astra Reverse Lamed Ryu says I can't talk today. I'm gonna start that over. Astra Reverse Lamed Ryu for $4.99 says chanting wrong to the tune of church bells in the distance. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Let's hear number 2, shall we?
Specifically.
That was one of the main premises.
It was, yeah. The JEDP, the documentary hypothesis, falsely assumes that the Israelites waited until many centuries after the foundation of their nation before committing any of their history or laws to written form.
But
no, it doesn't assume that.
One of the things that is, again, just read the text. One of the things that is within the text are numerous signposts of writing well after the fact within the Torah, right? One of the things that was noticed hundreds of years ago was the mention of a place or of a region. And the qualifier that this is the name of this place as it's still known today.
Right, which wouldn't make sense
Hundreds
if the
of years
is contemporaneous to the events.
Why would Moses write that?
Yeah,
remember that town we just sacked 87 days ago?
It's still called the same thing.
Still called that same thing.
Hey guys,
it hasn't changed. In the last 8 weeks.
One day I picked up and moved to Arizona, which is the name that the state is still known by today. All these 5 years later.
Oh, good.
Sean, who's been a member for 11 months, says, realizing that the Bible couldn't have been written by only one person possibly did as much to trigger my deconstruction as leaving on Earth creationism did with a Mothra. I mean, I think that, look, if your goal, like this guy's goal is to keep Christianity as a thing that's continuing to go on in, the world, that's one of the reasons why I would say to them, then maybe you don't want to go down this route of, denying very basic facts about the Bible. You know, like when certain things were written, because that's what that leads to. Is like if you make this a major part of your identity, right? That not only are we Christians, but we're the Christians who believe in this particular segment of things about when this book was written, and then it's just shown very conclusively, without even any research, just reading the text itself. That can't quite be right. Well, why would people stick with
Markel, yeah, Alex Markel has provided a very important corrective to me here by noting that they can't read ancient Hebrew, let alone their native language.
Good point. Yeah, my guess is these guys do not know any Hebrew at all. Which, I mean, I'm not saying that as if I'm some kind of Hebrew scholar. I get excited when I can string two Hebrew words together from a text and actually understand them, even when they're common words. So, like, you know, but even that is way more than they can do. I can almost guarantee it. So, here.
Even though their neighbors kept written records of their own history and religion from before the time of Moses.
Right.
Okay, I also want to point out that also doesn't actually mean that the Hebrews did, right? If you say, okay, did you know that the Aztecs had a writing system? Or sorry, the Mayans. You know, the Mayans had a writing system. Therefore, so did the Diné, who were living, you know, only a few hundred miles away. No, that doesn't follow, because we know the Diné or the Navajo didn't have a writing system at the time. That's just not how it works. The fact that your neighbors can write things doesn't mean you can. You can even... I'll stick with Native American languages, right? There's a Cherokee syllabary. But the Cherokee syllabary was not created until quite a bit after the Latin alphabet was introduced to the continent of North America by European colonizers. It took quite a while for someone to think, hey, that's a cool idea. What if I create a writing system for my language, Cherokee? And then they did that. But what that means is that there's a time gap when Europeans are writing things down in North America. The Cherokee are aware of this fact and also not doing that thing. They're not writing things. At least not in Cherokee. I'm sure some of them learned English and figured out how to write English. But, you know, like that's a thing. We know this from historical times. That just because you are an illiterate society near a literate society is not reason on its own for you to then come up with a writing system for your own language.
You know, one of the very interesting things that we see in a handful of biblical texts is the existence of a polemic against writing as somehow less reliable, less indicative of truth. Or
we have this idea that the word of the Lord comes from prophets, not from a bunch of books,
right?
And whatnot.
Yeah, you shouldn't trust books, people.
Trust the words of the prophets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is conveniently something the prophets are telling you.
Right. One of my favorites in Jeremiah chapter 8, verse 7, Jeremiah says, don't trust the lying pen of scribes because it lies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's almost like this whole thing is way more complicated than the simplistic thing that we're getting from these guys. Because again, they've never actually looked into this. They never really like these guys are just polemicists for a particular brand of Christianity and a particularly anti-intellectual brand, I want to point out, right? Sure, they have their pet PhDs, but that's it. They don't actually engage with the scholarship. These guys aren't going to biblical scholarship conferences. They aren't reading the biblical scholarship being put out by, you know, actual scholars in the field. They're not doing these things because that's not the point. They don't care about what's actually true about the Bible. They care about the people who support them continuing to believe the things that lead to that support. Now, I'm not saying it's a conscious effort to do a grift, right? But in the long run, that's how you get this group of people. It is a selected group of people who will do the things that keep the people paying them believing the things that keep them paying them. Doesn't have to be a conscious grift, but that's how it ends up working out. Because it's kind of like intellectual natural selection. The people who don't do that don't get the money, don't get the audience, and now they're out of the running for this. So I'm not accusing them of an intentional grift, but that's what's going on here. These are not people who care about what's true about the text. Because if they did, then they would care about things like textual evidence, manuscript evidence, archaeological evidence surrounding the text, but they don't. Sean for $5 says all neighbors have always had writing systems. That's why Japan always had a writing system, and it wasn't just because of China. Yeah, that's another great example, right? The adoption of Chinese characters into other languages in East Asia is something that we know happened at historical points in time, and that before that, there had already been a history of contact between China and these groups. Like, China was trading with Japan and Korea and all these places before those places adopted Chinese characters as their writing system and then modified them in various ways. We can also tell that happened at different times in different places because of how they used the Chinese characters. Because in China, the use of Chinese logographs changes over time. Obviously, it's a language. Writing systems change just as languages change. And so we can tell that because of the ways that these characters are used in different languages, roughly when those characters started being used in those other languages. You can trace the whole thing. And yeah, it's another great example. There's a whole big period of time when no one was writing down a single darn thing in Japan, and then they started to use Chinese characters, and then they started to develop their own syllabaries, and now you have one of the most annoying writing systems in the entire world. Thanks, Japan.
The author is...
No, I was going to say, I hesitate to draw your attention to, but I think you missed a member chat.
Oh, I did. Fate to Grey.
You don't have to read that one.
Horrible Ilk Enjoyer, who's been a member for 22 months, says, what milestone do we need to hit to get Dr. Kip to wear a tutu?
Is that question for me?
Well, I can't tell you when to wear a tutu because I don't know how I could possibly enforce it. So you're the only one who can meaningfully answer it.
Like, I don't even know how I would, like, I guess I would have to buy a tutu.
I mean, at that point, if it really came down to it, I probably could get you a tutu. Which would probably mean you would buy the tutu, and then I would give you some money for the tutu.
Or how's this?
Okay.
I am wearing a tutu right now.
How about this? What if you guys give $1 million on one of these streams, I will buy Kip a tutu, and he will wear it around some part of his body that you can see on stream, like its shoulders or something.
I will do that. Yes, okay. For $1 million. For yes.
Okay,
there we go.
That's the answer. $1 million, everybody.
$1 million.
Yeah. And then I'm gonna go buy myself a new house. Astro Reverse Lamed Ryu for $4.99 says, fun fact. Said Japanese syllabaries were directly derived from Middle Chinese pronunciation of Middle Chinese characters. Yeah, which gives us more evidence as to when the Japanese picked up Chinese writing, because we can tell it's Middle Chinese, which is not the same as the modern Chinese pronunciation of those same characters on which they base their syllabaries. It's almost like you can actually learn things about the history of the spread of writing and different writing systems by investigating things like linguistics, archaeology, and history. Weird. And then when you do those things, you know what you don't come to the conclusion of? That the Hebrews had their own distinctive writing system and language in the year 1400 BCE.
Obviously, an eyewitness of the Exodus from Egypt, familiar with the geography, the flora, the fauna of the region. He uses several Egyptian words, refers to customs that go back to the second millennium BC. So
this is only significant if the conclusion is, 1, no one ever traveled to Egypt after the Exodus, and 2, if Egyptian hegemony wasn't something that grew and waned throughout the region over this period of history, which neither of those things are true. We know that Egyptian hegemony was operational to various degrees throughout this time. Sometimes you could even argue that they had direct control over large parts of these areas. It wasn't just a hegemony. And also, we know that merchants traveled. They brought back stories. They said where they had been. They brought back words, especially for things like where... if it's an Egyptian product that you're bringing back to Canaan to sell, chances are the word for that product is just going to come away being the Egyptian word because you don't have a native word for it. That's how loan words tend to work, right? Someone introduces a new item that you don't have a word for, so you just use the word that it was operational in the language that of the people who gave you that thing. That's where like the words tea comes from, right? Tea comes from one of the Chinese words for that. Now, in most other languages, it's cha, or many other languages, it's cha or something similar like chai, which is from a different Chinese language. And which version of the word for tea you use depends on whether you primarily got tea from overland travel or from sea travel, because the seaport where most of the tea was sold spoke a different Chinese language than the various towns that were selling it by land for transport west along things like the Silk Road.
Yeah. So one of the ways that I know that this sort of argument about loan words gets marshaled in the direction of the antiquity of the biblical text and the authenticity of specifically things like the Book of Exodus. And the way this argument works is not just that there's, these loan words, but that they're, they were in usage in Egypt at this period of time and then gradually fell out of usage and were replaced by other words at a later point in time. One of the reasons this sort of argument doesn't work at all is because the tendency is that when these loan words get calcified in a new language, they then don't tend to change.
Yeah.
Along with the way the language where, the origin language developed.
Right.
So it's like, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like,
if you adopt a word if a language gets a loan word from another language, the changes in use can tell you when the word was adopted, but that doesn't tell you when the use of that word is when that word is currently being used, right? So, for instance,
yes.
English got a bunch of words from Norman French, but not all of them are still the common word for that thing in modern French. But we still use them in English. And the same thing happens in Hebrew, right? If the Hebrews get this word for some kind of Egyptian linen from Middle Egyptian, and they're still using it like 3 dynasties later, but the Egyptians aren't, that's not surprising. And finding that word in a text puts a earliest date, but you can't use it to figure out a latest date, unless you can say for certain that that particular language also had a changeover in how that particular item was referred to. You have to actually look at Hebrew in this case. You're just saying, there's a bunch of Middle Egyptian words from like the 12th dynasty, doesn't indicate that the text was composed in the 12th dynasty. You would have to do a lot more work than that. And it couldn't just be based on which part of Egyptian history those words were common in. So yeah, it's almost like this takes effort, and you can't just kind of like go with whatever makes you feel good because it doesn't even help with your theology, but you think it does for some reason. Because again, I want to point out, nothing we're discussing here actually is a problem for like conservative Christian theology. It's just not. Other things might be, but not this.
Yep.
Obviously,
I'm going to go for a little bit longer because I want to get to the halfway point of this, because if we break here, we do like another 6, then there will be like 3 minutes at the end. So if we could split this into 2 weeks, we'll go a little bit longer. We've only got about a minute and 15 that I want to get through on this, which will probably take us another 4 hours or so.
Writer Moses would have been familiar with what the Egyptians.
Yes, of course, yeah. Number 3, within the Pentateuch, in
it's weird he didn't write it in Egyptian, eh?
Yeah. Maybe he didn't. Was later translated by Moses, and that's another thing they mean by edited by Moses.
Yeah,
maybe.
See, but I mean, as I mentioned before, we know the text was written in Hebrew. I mean, that's just an indisputable fact. It wasn't, and what we mean by that is that we know with a high degree of probability that it wasn't translated from another language,
right? Like
Egyptian. If it had been, we'd be able to tell that.
Yeah, translations tend to bring in like turns of phrases and characteristic phrasing and whatnot from the original language. There's a reason why it always feels a little bit off when you're reading a translation, unless that translator has done a really lot of extra effort to make it sound natural in the language you're reading it in. It's one of the reasons why I would suggest that, where possible, you read text in the original language, because it will be better that way.
Indicates that Moses was the writer. Right. Now, when people write letters or emails and include their name at the bottom, it's an excellent indication that person wrote the text.
Yeah, why?
So please show me where Moses included his name at the bottom.
Yeah, where's the by Moses aspect of this?
Where's the title page?
Exactly.
4, outside of the Pentateuch, many times...
Nope, not going to tell you. Just say it's there. okay, sure, buddy.
It's there. It's because on your English Bibles it says something like the first book of the Pentateuch,
or the first book of Moses or something.
Genesis, or the first book of Moses.
Yeah.
Called Genesis.
Yeah, that's actually something I've never really heard a great response to. Is that every once in a while I'll ask someone who's doing the whole sola scriptura thing. I'm like, okay, so which part of the Bible tells you what's in the Bible in the first place? Because if you're supposed to be getting all your vital doctrines from the Bible, you need to know which books those are. That sounds like a vital doctrine on its own. So that must be in the Bible, right? So where is it?
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. Yeah. It's not.
So I'll make this. I'll make this point quickly, and then we can move on. We have a very, very small handful of fragments from manuscripts in the Dead Sea Scrolls that actually have titles on them.
Oh.
Yeah, they appear on the verso side, so the other side of the manuscript, and they're kind of scratched on the edge, so that when it's rolled up, you can see it clearly displayed there, right? And one of these manuscripts is actually a copy of the Book of Genesis, and you'll never guess what it says on the front cover.
Bereshit?
It says Bereshit.
Yeah.
That's
it. In the rest of the Old Testament, Moses is said to have been the writer.
Yes.
Clearly, the writers of those other books held to Mosaic authorship.
Right.
Okay. I have to point out that even if it's the case, which I'm not actually aware of too many places where you could reasonably infer that the author of a later biblical text, outside of the New Testament at least, is referring to anything in the Torah as written by Moses. But even if it were the case, that's not actually evidence of it being true. That's evidence of the author of that text thinking it's true. And the only way that this works as an argument is if you accept the infallibility of the text in the first place. So, yeah, I guess I understand why that would be an effective argument for their target audience. But for anyone not in their target audience, I don't see how that works. And are you aware of any place outside of the New Testament that refers to the books in the Torah as having been authored by Moses? Because I'm not off the top of my head, but I don't have the entirety of the Hebrew Scriptures memorized, so what do I know?
Yeah,
I'm drawing a blank.
It's not. Yeah.
Van Deligan 1998 for $4.99 says, "Is the original language better even when you translate it into Klingon?" Yeah, but that's why I still recommend that you read Shakespeare in the original Klingon, because it is the original language for Shakespeare. Because Shakespeare, as we all know, was a Klingon, right? And then as a sort of a cultural grab, the Federation took some Klingon texts, translated them into old-fashioned English, and then just claim that these texts were actually from some ancient Terran author named William Shakespeare, which is crazy. Also, someone's been a member at the Tetrapod level for 5 months, but doesn't say who, so thanks for being a member. Ernie Matthews for $5 says, "If 2 million Israelites had wandered in an LA-sized desert for 40 years, the turds and potsherds would be stacked up chin high." I guess I could argue about how fast those things would go away and how much pottery they use. But yeah, there should be some kind of something from a 40-year wander around a largely uninhabited desert that's only the size of the size of the Sinai Peninsula. There should be something.
Number 5, in the New Testament, Jesus frequently spoke of Moses' writings or the law of Moses. Jesus said that those who...
Well, even without accepting Mosaic authorship, you can still call it the law of Moses, because the internal narrative is that law was given to Moses, no matter who wrote the text. So I'm also not really aware of times when Jesus said that these were written by Moses as opposed to just being the law of Moses. Maybe I'm wrong there. But unless you can actually find that, even with the biblical inerrancy doctrine, that still just says that Moses received the law, which is just the internal narrative of the text anyway, right? Okay. Jacqueline Uthoff for $2 beaver bucks says, "My 13-year-old now requests your videos for background homework noise." Nice.
Aw.
Nice.
That's cute.
Yeah, actually, I know a lot of people who use my videos as background noise for various things. it's like, oh, I have something to do. Turn on Dapper Dinosaur. I'm like, hey, I am happy to accompany your cooking or your tidying up or your homework or whatever it is. I am A-okay with that.
Who hear not, or that is reject Moses, would not be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. Right. In Luke 16:31, we read that. Thus we see that those churches and seminaries that reject the historicity of Moses' writings often also reject the literal bodily resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ. Awesome. Jesus made that connection right there.
Awesome. And so for evangelicals to be accepting this, it's ridiculous.
It's crazy,
really.
Yeah.
So, of course.
Well, that's where we're going to pause it now, because we're just about at the 8-minute mark. So, look, I will say this. I do get that their target audience is not us three, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I do
We're a niche market.
We are a niche. We literally are a niche market.
We are the niche market.
Right. Yeah, we're the niche market.
Yeah.
So, in case anyone's wondering, yeah, that's a reference to the name of our group chat on Discord. We made it to the niche market as a result of something someone else said in a previous stream. So I get that this panel, as well as primarily my audience, are not the target audience for this, right? This is targeted at people who are already accepting some version of biblical inerrancy and who are accepting some version of biblical univocality and whatnot. And so for that reason, I do get why they're making these arguments about what, say, the Gospels say. But the problem is that if you actually want to make the claim that the scholars are arguing in bad faith, which is a claim that they've made, you have to use reasoning that those scholars could in good faith accept. And if they have not started from the premise of the univocality of the Bible and its inerrancy, then pointing to arguments that only work if those things are true is not something that those scholars would accept while arguing in good faith. So if you want to say, we have good reason to think that Moses wrote the Bible, but and these scholars are just, ignoring our good reasons, but your reason starts with the kind of thing that you would like to demonstrate, which is, the univocality and inerrancy of the Bible in the first place, that doesn't help. This is just going to ultimately lead to a circular reasoning. Because the point of all of this, right, is these guys want to bolster the belief in the inerrancy of the Bible. But by using other parts of the Bible than the one they're talking about, ones that were universally acknowledged to have been written well over 1,000 years afterwards, in pretty much all cases, except maybe the latest bits of the Torah, might have been more like, 800 or 900 years before the Gospels, which I'm still comfortable just rounding off to about a millennium, right? By using those and trying to backwards argue that means that the Moses wrote the Torah, you're just using circular reasoning to reinforce your idea of biblical inerrancy and univocality and whatnot. That doesn't work, right? It's not going to help someone who's currently questioning their religion or someone who's looking for what a non-believing scholar might look at as just the actual evidence on the ground. So I really don't get why they're using this particular rhetorical strategy. I don't get how they can look at this rhetorical strategy and think that it's a intellectually honest thing to do. And I guess that might go hand in hand with the whole triangle meme, where you can't be well-informed and a creationist and honest. And so we already have good reason to suspect that these guys aren't all that intellectually honest. But maybe in the next 8-ish minutes, which I'm hoping to get to next week if everyone's available, we can figure out more about why it is that this is the route that they've chosen to go down. Because to me, it's fantastically unpersuasive to say that if I have my particular reading of the Gospels, it indicates that the Gospel authors said that Jesus believed that Moses wrote the Torah, therefore Moses wrote the Torah. That's fantastically unpersuasive to me. It reminds me of the time that the Jehovah's Witnesses came to my door trying to use the amazing mathematical coincidences in Daniel, as evidence for the truth of their religion. And the thing that I said that until this day scared them off, except for leaving an invitation to the memorials service at my door, was, okay, well, I want to know how it is that we know that Daniel isn't a post-exilic text and is instead something that was written contemporaneously to the exile, such that these are in fact prophecies and not simply things that are written from after the fact into a text set in the time of the exile. And we're really good at research. We'll get back to you. they've not come back. Because that's the thing. In order for that to be persuasive, you have to be able to show that there's good reason to take the premises seriously. And it's not happening here. And look, if you want to take the Bible as univocal and inerrant, can't stop you. But what I'm going to say is, that is something that you have just decided to believe. It is very hard to justify that on the basis of the history of the text itself, archaeology, or anything else. And I also want to point out, if you think that that's a problem for Christianity, most Christians throughout history have not treated the Bible this way. I was saying to Vishanti before we went on air, it was very common early in Christianity for various Christian authors to note that there was some kind of contradiction here in, say, the Gospels, and just say, oh, one of them got it a bit wrong, and then just move on. Because Christianity was not, for most of its history, based on the idea that the Bible had to be literally true about everything, and it couldn't make any errors. Most Christians throughout all of history were just like, yeah, there's errors here and there, whatever. The main thrust of the books is what we care about. We don't care about exactly how many fish Jesus made into feed exactly how many people, or, you know, exactly how many chariots this particular king had, or exactly which day this battle. Like, who cares? It doesn't matter. The point that we are getting from these scriptures are like about things like the love of God, his concern for righteousness, the redemptive acts of God throughout history, those things, right? That's the important message. That's the typical through line from Christianity. So if you're listening to this and you're a Christian and you find this disturbing, I want you to know that there's a long history of Christianity completely acknowledging that the Bible is not always historically accurate and is not free of contradictions, and that has been the default point for theologians in Christianity since before young earth creationism was a thing created by basically the Seventh-day Adventists, like late in the 19th century, and then adopted by wider fundamentalist Christianity in the middle of the 20th century. Because remember, the people who wrote like the fundamentals of the Christian faith, the foundational document for fundamentalist Christianity, they weren't young earth creationists. They did not believe that the Bible meant the things that these guys think it does. This particular brand of Christianity is not even a century old. It would be unrecognizable to the vast majority of Christians who have ever lived. And to be honest, to many Christians who currently live. So that's one of the things I always like to point out on this channel is the degree to which the people we talk about are often on the fringes, even within their various religious traditions. It's also why, like, you know, I recently did a series on some Muslim apologists who were doing anti-evolution stuff. That is not the universal consensus among Muslims, that evolution just isn't a thing. And to back that up, I quoted Muslim scientists from the Middle East who are supportive of evolution because they exist. And even when I talked about the most anti-scientific and anti-intellectual strains in Islam, I pointed out that that's never been the universal consensus. Anyway, now that I've given that spiel that we should not take these guys as just the standard for anything other than, you know, their own particular niche brand, does anyone here have anything that's coming up on their channels or any other channels where they're going to be appearing they want to tell my audience about?
I don't have anything booked, but I'm open for requests.
Well, there you go.
I actually, you know, when I looked at my calendar this morning, noticed that I am actually booked in on Potential Theists channel, which is called Potential Theism. But it is next Saturday, so I'm going to see if I can convince him to shift that around a little bit to free me up to finish this in its entirety.
If you can't, let me know, because I can always do something else and then just continue with this a week after or something, right?
I'll fight him. I'll fight him for your honor.
Thanks, Fish. But I don't think it'll be an issue. I'm Jordan's pretty chill, so he'll. Yeah. I think we'll be able to sort that out. Okay. And I don't have it on the schedule yet, but I was planning on probably doing a live stream this week. I might even live stream on my birthday.
Whoa.
Hey.
But yeah, and maybe we'll call it a birthday stream. But
I do birthday streams. I like those.
Do you?
Yeah. I actually usually stream for most of the day. I break it up into like three different streams, and
oh wow!
Because look,
wow, that's wild.
It's like the biggest birthday party I'm going to get is with, like, you know, the people who are going to watch the channel. Like, how many other times am I going to get that many people to hang out with me on my birthday, except for chat?
See, so listen, my wife is actually going to be out of town.
Oh,
on my
real
birthday.
Party time.
Like I'm just going to be here by myself on my birthday.
No, you can be live with your audience.
Maybe that's the way to do this.
Yeah.
But I'll just to let everyone know, just to give you a bit of a teaser about what I'm thinking. So I've been reading some stuff over this last week. I don't know if you guys, if you watched our Diablo Critics stream from last weekend, you'll know that we spent some time talking about this guy, this absolute chud of a guy, Jeremiah J. Johnston, Christian apologist extraordinaire, who really, really wants you to know that he was in Oxford, guys. He was
the city, not the school.
So,
dishonest.
I have spent a lot of time over the last week reading through some output by the one Dr. Jeremiah J. Johnston. And I think it's worthwhile.
Is that his real name, or is that just a Marvel character name that he adopted? Because it sounds like a Marvel character.
Yeah, I'm like, this is like J. Jonah Jameson.
Now, and honestly, at this point, I'm open to thinking that might just be it. Because in the reading that I've done, I think there's probably sufficient reason to suspect that this guy is just a big fraud. And we can talk about that.
Okay.
When I live stream this week.
That sounds like a fun birthday.
I think so.
All right, so
come hang out on my birthday.
Let's see. On my channel, coming up on Tuesday, the plan is Matt with Maddie. By the way, once again, congratulations to Maddie for finishing her defense, and she is now Dr. Maddie, is what we're going to go with, because we're not using her last name here. So yeah, Maddie now has earned her PhD. She is in fact a PhD in climate science and meteorology. So
wow.
Now she really can take your requests about changing the weather. So before it was just a joke. Now it's for real. She's in charge of the weather.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Finally, someone is in charge of the weather.
I know, right?
Yeah.
So then on Thursday, the second part of the Incarnate God of the Gaps with Jennifer Hall Rivera is going to be coming up. That's one that's called For the Bible Tells Me So. If you like this, there's a very good chance you're going to like that, because that is a lot of that is her saying silly things about the Bible, and me saying, no, that is not true about the Bible. Let me show you why that is a silly thing to say about the Bible. Although in this case, I believe it's mostly the New Testament, and I say that because of one, the vague memory, and two, the fact that the thumbnail I used is in Greek and not in Hebrew. Because if it had been about the Hebrew scriptures, I probably would have put Hebrew on the thumbnail, but instead I put Greek. So that's me kind of vaguely remembering that. Don't quote me on that, though. I might just be wrong. Maybe I just decided Greek anyway. And then on Saturday, depending on what Kip is up to, we will either be finishing off this video, or I'll grab something else for me to talk about. And, of course, hopefully Vish will be there. But if something comes up, maybe it'll just be me. I don't think something's going to come up, but,
Never know.
Yeah, it's always possible. All right, well, with that, guys, if you are interested, the plan is to watch a little bit of Power Rangers Dino Thunder over on the Discord server, if that's your thing. If it's not your thing, that's cool, too. I hope to see all of you on Tuesday for Matt with Maddie. And, well, yeah, we're going to get out of here now. Bye, everybody. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Benthoven, Philravara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Denny5252, Elleron Teller, Horseflesh, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostek Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babdy, Monkey They Them, Sphincter of Doom, Vollus, John Ackerman, Eta V, and Strawberry Vein. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, There's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.